Look at the double standards. Look at the double standards. Israel has a legitimate concern related to Iran's nuclear program. Yeah, okay, we can understand it. Israel can take preventive action because it sees a threat from Iran, but Russia cannot do that in Ukraine. Russia cannot say, we see danger from NATO. Please consider our interests too. No. You can't do that because you're Russia. You have to shut up and suck it up. But when Israel sees a threat from Iran's nuclear program, it is entitled to a preventive attack with the help of the United States and the entire West. France said that they're backing them up. Again, where are international norms? Where are international norms? So one state can think about its future and see future threats and take action, which we kind of can understand in certain conditions. But another state for 25 years, 30 years has been telling you that it's very concerned with this. Please don't do this. This is threatening us. No. It doesn't matter.
This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today we once more need to discuss the fresh war that Israel and the US plunged Iran into after the sneaky surprise attack on Tehran and other Iranian cities last Friday. To discuss the situation from one of Iran's northern neighbors, I'm joined today by Dr. Arthur Kachikian. Arthur holds a PhD in international relations from Stanford University and currently teaches at the Armenian University in Yerevan. That's the capital city of Armenia. Arthur, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me back, Pascal. And I promise to never mention Margaret Thatcher again.
Don't mention Thatcher. Don't mention the war.
Oh, your people are leftists, yeah.
Let's start with what's going on. I mean, Yerevan, you are 200 kilometers away from the border, right, to
yes.
Iran.
Yes.
What's the situation right now? Is there any impact on you guys over there?
Well, people are very worried. It may have a very destabilizing effect for the whole South Caucasus region. Iran was playing a role of a mediator between us and Azerbaijan, a republic next door with which we had a very complicated relationship, and a few military incidents happened in the last few years. There was a war in 2020, and Iran was one of those countries that stabilized the situation in the region, together with Russia and to a certain extent Turkey, although it was a little bit partial. But now with this destabilizing consequences of the attack on Iran, people are really worried that Armenia may be the next target. Unfortunately, we do not have a very friendly relationship with our neighbors to the east and to the west. And people are worried that this may be an opportunity for them to also resort to military action, that the war will have a domino effect in our region.
So with Azerbaijan especially, right, and Turkey
Well, yes.
secondarily.
With Turkish support, yeah.
But so far, is it fair to say that people are just watching and are being like on the edge of what is being hit? Because I hear like northern, the Azeri part of Iran was also hit, and that one is quite close to Armenia as well, isn't it?
Well, it's on our border, yes. They are on the edge. That's the right way to put it. They're very worried. They're on the edge. What this means, Pascal, is we're making another step towards law of the jungle. It's the law of the powerful. You know, we are back to Thucydides. The strong do what they want, and the weak have to accept, have to do what they must. That was his formula. So we're going back to the world of the jungle. We're casting aside any semblance of international norms. And basically power. We resolve everything by power. Peace through strength. This is not peace through strength. This is world chaos, instability, and potentially moving towards World War III through strength. This is very strange. I'm very surprised that the U.S. administration is following this course.
Let's go there, because like the fear that this conflict could develop very differently from the Russo-Ukrainian war, which for 3 years has been contained to these two places. And although the war was carried into Russia several times and has been fought also inside Russia, it has been mostly fought inside Ukraine. Now, what we are seeing with Iran could immediately turn different, right? For now, the official narrative is it's Israel and Iran exchanging blows. But we know that this was made possible through U.S. assistance, and we are seeing right now preparations apparently by the U.S. to join with its military forces. Can you maybe speak a little bit about what you know about where the U.S. forces are at the moment?
Well, yes, my information is coming from open sources. From what I understand, there's been a movement now of British and American Air Force and naval units towards the region of the conflict. Apparently, some refueling planes have left the United States for Britain, and then probably they're going to head for the Middle East. And 2 aircraft carriers were moved closer to the Persian Gulf, from what I understand. I mean, we all knew that this attack could not have been possible without the U.S. involvement, military involvement, the weapons that they were providing. The financing, of course, came from the United States, and reconnaissance. And you saw the article in ABC. Well, ABC Media said that, and then New York Times quoted them. We provided exquisite intelligence to Israel. We all knew that, of course. And also the style of this attack. Remember how it started with the drones that were smuggled into Iranian territory and then activated suddenly. This is the same style as that pretty disturbing attack on the Russian nuclear triad that happened, I think, 2 weeks earlier? It's the same style. It's the same handwriting. Regarding the war in Ukraine, this attack is pretty unprecedented. Never during the Cold War could we have imagined an attack on a nuclear triad of one of the superpowers. This was just unthinkable. This is a lot more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. I mean, we would all be in shelters right now. But we can talk about that when you want. As for this, you saw that they smuggled these drones. That is a pretty well-organized covert operation. The drones were smuggled into Iranian territory, and then they struck at the Iranian air defense systems and at the ballistic missiles. And that gave Israel the advantage of a surprise attack. From what I understand, there was some tentative agreement to continue the negotiations on Sunday, so 3 days after the attack was launched. So Iran was caught by surprise. It doesn't strike me as a very good way to conduct negotiations. And again, this could go towards a major escalation. I mean,
we are also seeing that the Chinese officially declared that they condemn the attack on Iran, and they are basically picking the side of Iran. How do you think these 2 great powers, Russia and China, together are going to influence whatever is going to come out of this, however this conflict is going to develop?
Well, to speak to your question, from what I understand, there have been some airplanes heading for Iran from China. It's possible that it's just an allegation. It's possible that it's just rumor. But apparently, China was providing some military assistance to Iran, some technical assistance to Iran. Of course, China was not going to get involved militarily, but some assistance was possible. They have a pretty good relationship with Iran. Now, what we need to understand is that this conflict, we now have 2 major conflicts in the world with great powers getting involved to various degree. This is like 1910s or 1930s. I mean, a lot of people have been saying World War III. It's become commonplace to say that. But really, if you look at what's happening, we're moving closer and closer to a major international conflict. The only thing missing is now China. If China got involved in a major conflict, let's say over Taiwan, or moved closer to Russia and forged a closer military alliance with Russia, then we have a classic World War situation where we have 2 alliances of great powers, and we have several conflicts in which they are involved, and they have rigid alliances formed between them. So the Middle East could play the same role that the Balkans played in 1910s. And you remember the road to World War I was paved by the Italian invasion of Libya in 1911 and the Balkan Wars of 1912, 1913, because they basically demonstrated to the world that it's possible to solve problems by brute force. And then, of course, that escalated to the Balkan War, and then the reinsurance treaty was canceled with Russia, and Russia drifted towards France, and we had 2 alliances. The same thing happened during World War II. Kind of the Spanish Civil War was an interesting event preceding World War II. Again, the great powers were showing their muscles and trying, checking each other out. But this could be another instance. We now have 2 major conflicts. We have a huge conflict in Ukraine. This is not Vietnam. This is not Korea. This is not Afghanistan. This is 40 times. If you look at the number of casualties, this is World War I figures. I mean, some sources are saying over 1 million people were killed, which is more than the British casualties and close to French casualties in World War I. This is a major thing, and there's no sign of it abating. The negotiations failed as predicted, and now we have a different region, the Middle East, with another major conflict. So by definition, this is getting very, very close to a world war. What does it take to have a world war? You need to have most of the great powers involved, which may be happening right now, and the conflict has to take place in more than one geographic area, more than one continent. This is getting pretty close. And what is very dangerous about this kind of policy, peace through strength, basically brute force as a way of solving conflicts, is you're giving an example to other countries, and you're going to stimulate the creation of a counterbalancing coalition. This is going to push Russia and China closer together, because they're going to see that the U.S. is capable of this kind of action. So there's going to be less trust. There's going to be less space for diplomacy, especially when negotiations are used to trick your adversary. Russia and China may move closer towards forming an alliance, and there you have it. You have two alliances, just like World War I and World War II.
Yeah, and let's not forget, the Second World War II started for the first 2 years. The Second World War was a European war. It was warfare in Europe, and then, countries got sucked in bit by bit. It didn't all happen all at once. And Japan was at war with China ever since 1931. I mean,
yes.
These wars, also in the Second World War, this just started coming together. And the picture that we have today of Germany, Italy, and Japan having been in bed with each other for the whole time and having a hard alliance is nonsense. Let's just also remember that Japan and Soviet Union had a neutrality pact, right, that kept them neutral toward each other while they were fighting their allies over there. So this is what we're seeing now is like, really, I mean, you're right. It's the dynamics of a multilateralization of all-out warfare. And
yes,
or a country like yours, Armenia, being in the spot where it is, and others like, let's say, Azerbaijan and Turkey may be thinking like, well, why if not now, then when? This chance also becomes higher, doesn't it?
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, you mentioned Japan. The Japanese invasion of Manchuria was one of the reasons why everybody thought this was okay to do, and one of the reasons why the League of Nations fell apart. The Italian invasion of Abyssinia or Ethiopia was another example. When one country does it and it's okay to do it, then another country starts doing it. You basically have the whole concept of international law and international community and post-war order fall to pieces. We talked about this with you. Remember last time? When we talked about the rules of the game, the post-war orders. One of the rules is do not act unilaterally. Collective decision-making, collective intervention, and common security, collective security. All these principles were violated. Back in the 90s in Yugoslavia, already the UN was put out of the game. The West bypassed the United Nations, although I must say I respectfully disagree with some of my Russian colleagues. It was justified in a way. The horrors of Srebrenica, the killings of Srebrenica justified intervention, but it should have been done in a different way. They bypassed the United Nations. The bombings of Yugoslavia in 1999, unilateral military action, and then it got worse and worse. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, now Iran. This is basically the rule of the jungle. In international history, we sometimes have these transitions from equilibrium and rule-based order to force-based order and domination. Equilibrium, domination. Equilibrium, domination. Like 18th century, classic balance of power, equilibrium. Napoleonic Wars, domination. Then you have the Concert of Europe. Then that falls apart. We go to German hegemony. We go back and forth and back and forth. And now we have the world of Pax Americana, American hegemony, America struggling to keep its hegemony, to dominate. And sadly, this is a world in which invasions like this are possible. Surprise attacks are possible. So who's going to be next? Small countries like ours, we're just going to fall by the wayside. Nobody's going to even notice. We're too small for the world to notice.
That's exactly true. And it's very, very dangerous in this sense now, also for others, not just due to the primary conflict, but in a sense, like what we're seeing now is also not that new, right? I mean, it's not the first time that a country gets attacked out of the blue unprovokedly. It's very reminiscent, actually, the entire rhetoric about Israel's right to self-defense and the entire narrative that was built up since Friday, that this is a preemptive strike against weapons of mass destruction, against potential of Iran to having a nuclear bomb. Besides the fact that this has been like in the media for 40 years and that Israel has been claiming for 30 years at least that Iran is only 1 or 2 years away from the bomb. Constantly, I mean, we have Netanyahu on record saying so back in the 90s. But apart from that, it's not that new that suddenly you just see this aggressive warfare. In which sense is this currently still different in your assessment?
Well, before I forget, Tulsi Gabbard said in March that there was no evidence that Iran was preparing a nuclear weapon, and she, of all people, would know. I mean, she's presiding over a dozen U.S. intelligence agencies, so she would definitely know if there was such a plan. And you're right, for years we've heard this argument, oh, Iran will have a nuclear weapon in 2 weeks. Iran will have a nuclear weapon in a month, in 2 months. I've been hearing this for at least 10 years. This has been used a lot. Remember the argument in Iraq. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Remember that famous shot of Colin Powell shaking that, white powder thing, and for which he apologized for the rest of his life. And he's an honorable man, at least he had the honor to apologize for it. Does Israel have a right for self-defense? Of course it does. Do Jews in Israel have the right to live peacefully? Yes. And so do Palestinians. Does that give you a right to attack Israel on the other side? Does it have the right to attack Israel on October 7th? No, it was a barbaric attack. It's absolutely unacceptable and should be condemned. But does that mean that you have to respond with barbarity to barbarity and start killing Palestinians and basically do what the United Nations has termed genocide? I mean, is this a legitimate response? No. In this case, does Israel have a right to defend itself against Iran? Yes. But this argument of preventive defense, does it really work? I mean, you mentioned it in one of your talks 4 days ago, the international law has certain provisions for it, preemptive defense. There has to be an imminent attack. The attack has to be imminent. There's a Caroline test. There was an incident in 1840s. I looked it up after I heard you. There was an incident in 1840s when Britain attacked a U.S. ship near Niagara Falls because it was helping insurgents on Canadian territory. And the argument was that if the attack is imminent, if you don't have the time to find any other solution to this problem, if you have no other means of countering this attack, then yes, it could be justified. But there was no imminent attack on the part of Iran. Negotiations were continuing. You had a precedent on which you could have built. You had JOCPA in 2015, right? And then President Trump left it in 2018. And there were some very serious limitations on the Iranian nuclear program. I mean, I just looked it up when I was getting ready for our talk. 13,000 centrifuges were supposed to be dismantled. Iran could have only kept 6,000 of them under tight international supervision, a limit of 300 kilograms of enriched uranium. Uranium had to be enriched up to 3.65%, which is civilian. It's an interval of civilian use. So there were ways to resolve this peacefully, and negotiations were underway. But to do this, negotiations means, like our very good friend Professor Sachs said, and Professor Milsheimer, they said, negotiations with the U.S. means you do it or we'll kill you. I mean, this is not really negotiations. Diplomacy could have been given a chance.
No, but it isn't. I mean, it's again the same joke as with Ukraine, right? You pretend that there would have been that you were doing everything in your power to avoid bloodshed, but then the other side is unreasonable, so you have to use force yourself, right? When actually by now we know, no, the straightforward thing in Ukraine, which is a neutrality of Ukraine, was actively prevented from happening by the Western side, including, already when the conflict had started in March and April 2022, it was actively prevented in order to give legitimacy to using force. And we see that with Iran and Israel. Again, not only was the JCPOA working, and verifiably so by the IAEA and so on, everybody said, no, it's working, it's fine. And then you tear it up, then you put all of these maximum pressure, and the US even has the audacity to demand that Iran still adheres to the deal, right? Because the deal was actually continuing. The JCPOA continued with the Europeans. And then when Iran breached its limits, then under the JCPOA, the Americans years later said oh, you're in breach of the contract that we already canceled on our side. Plus, then you do these negotiations, and then you use the fact that the negotiations are not done yet in order to do a sneak attack. I mean, this is just the height of belligerent warmongering to me. The question is there still hope? Because to get back to not back to negotiations, but if I was Russian or Iranian, I would never ever in the world again trust even a single U.S. diplomat, even the most well-meaning, even people like Jack Matlock and so on. I just wouldn't be able to count on the fact that what they tell me is what their government is then actually doing.
Well, yes, I think the plan now is to have Yugoslavia type Dayton Accord type negotiations after bombing the heck out of them, because Israel is doing a pretty good job. And of course, my heart goes out to all civilians who suffered as a result of this war, both in Israel and in Iran. But the bombings continue on both sides. And if the U.S. joins, what are the scenarios here? One is that this conflict will continue for, let's say, a few days, some weeks, and then Israel will say, okay, we've destroyed the defense infrastructure in Iran. By the way, the risk of a nuclear accident there also pretty high. We destroyed their defense infrastructure. Now let's negotiate, and somebody will step in and be a mediator. That's a good scenario. The bad scenario, if the U.S. gets involved, then we'll have Yugoslavia or Iraq type bombings that will destroy most of Iran and then force Iran to come to the negotiating table. So that's Dayton Accords type peace. God forbid somebody tries to threaten to use nuclear weapons. There have been some talk. I'm picking up some news from Iran that some people are saying now we should exit the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So any hint of a potential, dash to develop a nuclear weapon will immediately bring on a preventive attack by Israel and the U.S. So it can get a lot worse. So I'm only hoping that cooler heads will prevail. But looking at our president, the way President Trump handles it, these messages on social media, this is so boyish. I'm sorry, it's very boyish. It's like a schoolboy writing in caps, this is going to be horrible. You better, step down now or it will get worse. This is not a leader of the, the United States speaking. This is so unreasonable.
The thing is that the U.S. also has been moving the goalpost while negotiating, right? This is Netanyahu already did this yesterday or the day before yesterday, saying we're confronted by two existential threats from Iran: the nuclear, the non-existing nuclear program, and the other one, the missile program. So it's okay, so now apparently Iran needs to commit to not have missiles. So basically, what we can see coming and in the minds of these people is either completely, utterly destroy Iran or otherwise cripple it completely one way or another, because there's no way that Iran can ever be convinced to give up a missile program, because we see what Israel does to countries without any kind of defense systems, right? Syria has been bombed, carpet bombed the whole time for years. Damascus airport has been bombed for years, time and again. The Israel just bombs the hell out of. Israel has been bombing the defenseless Palestinians in Gaza for the longest time. They call it mowing the lawn, euphemistically. So I think Israel is just currently contemplating, creating a lawn out of the entire Middle East that you can then sporadically bomb back into pieces whenever you please. And I think this is utterly clear to the Iranians.
Well, one other scenario you hinted at alluded to was the regime change in Iran. This could be one of the objectives. Yeah. The Israeli leader already issued an appeal to the Iranian population saying that you're not the enemy, your regime is the enemy, hinting that would not be a bad thing if you tried to change the regime. Then we would have the same type of a problem that we had in Iraq after the U.S. invasion in Iraq, when we had conflicts between the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds, and the U.S. had no idea how to resolve them. In Iran, we have Persians, we have Kurds, we have Arabs, we have Azeris, we have other groups. How are we going to, let's say we invaded, God forbid, we had the insanity of invading, putting boots on the ground, as they say, so land forces. What are we going to do with that territory and with those people? Are we going to do nation building in Iran? How long is that going to take? 20 years, 30 years? And it's going to end up the same way as Afghanistan and Iraq. It's just unthinkable. As for Israel, of course, Israel has the right for self-defense and peaceful existence. And that's why you have diplomacy. And that's why you have negotiations. And that's why you had the Oslo peace talks. You just needed to work on it a little bit more. It was pretty close to some kind of a, not maybe total resolution, but some kind of a modus vivendi. It was pretty close, but using force and using brute force and attacking everybody, on either side, that leads, action leads to counteraction. It always works like this. And after this, you're going to probably have more people joining the extremist organizations that Israel fears. It could really backfire. There will be more people joining, the various terrorist groups, various militias. Iran could have, in whatever form that it survives these attacks, will find new allies in the region. Action leads to counteraction in international relations. It always works like this. So,
And it's just impossible to sell the idea that Israel is the only country in the Middle East with a right to self-defense, and Iran doesn't have a right to self-defense. Of course, I mean, and let's not forget, Iran is a BRICS member as well.
Pascal, this is why we have rules. And this is why, last time we talked about the 90s, the idea of collective security. Security cannot be privatized. You cannot be secure at the expense of the others because they're going to start acting against you. It can never happen this way. This is why building a common European, maybe Eurasian security system, a regime with rules, 1991, Operation Desert Storm, an unprecedented event. The Soviet Union sanctioned the US action against Saddam Hussein because it was a violation of international norms. The first time in history, Moscow and Washington agreed that in this case, it was warranted. The US went in and liberated Kuwait. Rules. You need to have rules. You need to have a regime, system of expectations and international norms. And yes, Israel has that right. Iran has that right. The Jews in Israel have the right to live peacefully, and so do Palestinians. This is why you create a system of rules, a regime, you negotiate. This is why you do diplomacy, and you find a solution. Equilibrium, not domination and not brute force, because it will always backfire.
And, it's good that you point that out with the, democracy on the inside, but not in international relations. We can debate, how democratic certain societies is. But we do have this phenomenon right now that the countries that call themselves democratic look down and basically look at China and Russia, call them authoritarian systems, and say, like, we need to be so afraid of them because they will come after us. So the only way to be safe is if we transform them into democracies, right?
Regime change, yes.
But at the same time, elevating themselves to the arbiters of how international relations work. At the same time, the others, these authoritarian states, if we classify them as such, advocate openly for a democratic international process, right? For one country, one voice, and so on. Not quite as far as that, but they use that. They say we want a more democratic setup of the international system. So we have everybody basically rallying for democracy in one way or another, and in the process, creating narratives, especially the West right now, creating a narrative that justifies bloodshed and even genocide.
It's really horrific. What happened, one of the things I teach in my art class, I'm actually writing about it. By the way, my book is at 150 pages, yay. So one of the theories is democratic peace theory. What happened to that? Democratic values. Democracies are unlikely to go to war because of values, because they value human life and they prefer to resolve things peacefully. That's one of the tenets of the democratic peace theory. Because you resolve your domestic conflicts peacefully, you extrapolate that to international conflicts. So you start solving international conflicts peacefully, and you don't resort to violence because you value human life. And then there are other things. What happened to that? The democracies, entre guillemets, have been much more belligerent in the last 25 years than the so-called autocracies. Just count all the wars. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Iran, Georgia, Ukraine. Are you kidding me? What happened to democratic peace theory? I mean, how am I going to teach my students? Why did I go to college? I don't even know anymore.
There's two explanations possible for this one. Either democratic peace theory was BS from the beginning, or we don't have real democracies. We have oligarchies dressed up in a garment of democracy. And probably it's a mix of both.
Yes. It's a kleptocracy. I think that's what Professor Sachs calls it, because, one of the tenets of democratic peace theory is that people who gain from peace are going to restrain their governments. Well, we actually have people who gain from war because they make money on war. Because we have military-industrial complexes, and President Eisenhower warned about it, himself being a military man, what an amazing person. He said that in 1961, we've created a monster because war has become a business now. And you have all these enormous companies like Lockheed Martin, like General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Boeing, et cetera, et cetera. Their annual budget is like the military budget of Turkey. They're enormous. They're enormous companies, and they make money on war. And you have people like, I'm sorry, but what was his name? Lindsey Graham. He wrote on his social page, whatever, Twitter page, the game is on. This is a game? Really? You're a senior politician. You're 70 years old. How can you write things like this? It's so irresponsible. And this is not a democracy, because in this democracy, the foreign policy is controlled by lobbies. Lobbyism, like we said the last time, is a major problem with democracies. When the democratically elected governments, they are accountable not to the voters, but to corporations who make money on war, and political interest groups, private interest groups, ethnic lobbies of any kind. This is not a democracy.
Yeah. What about I talk on this channel a lot also about narratives and what people believe and what different groups of people believe. One of the things that I see changing is that the narrative control of the West is definitely getting weaker. It's not that easy anymore to just impose a certain interpretation and then have that swallowed, also because we have a social media and so on. But let's take Armenia. Around you, what is the dominant narrative about what's happening now with Iran?
Well, first of all, let me say that much owing to people like you and Judge Napolitano and Nemo, I forgot his last name, but there are some channels, YouTube channels, social media pages that are successfully fighting this enormous, well-funded propaganda machine. The corporate media, the official media. In Armenia, we have a furious battle between the pro-Western channels that are being financed by the West and by people who are trying to maintain a more balanced position, I guess. And they're also more pro-Russian, more pro-Western. So the same battle takes place here. But I see a shift now. I think people no longer believe what they see on CNN or BBC or ABC or MSNBC, all these official channels, even France Press, even Deutsche Welle. All these channels have shown that they're clear that it's just messaging, all the talking points. It's just propaganda. It is propaganda. There's no room for debate, for rationally exchanging opinions immediately. But look at the double standards. Israel has a legitimate concern, related to Iran's nuclear program. Yeah, okay, we can understand it. Israel can take preventive action because it sees a threat from Iran, but Russia cannot do that in Ukraine. Russia cannot say, we see danger from NATO. Please consider our interests too. No. You can't do that because you're Russia. You have to shut up and suck it up. But when Israel sees a threat from Iran's nuclear program, it is entitled to a preventive attack with the help of the United States and the entire West. France said that they're backing them up. Again, where are international norms? So one state can think about its future and see future threats and take action, which we kind of can understand in certain conditions. But another state for 25 years, 30 years has been telling you that it's very concerned with this. Please don't do this. This is threatening us. No, it doesn't matter. So in one case, it's legitimate to have concerns about your future and see a threat from your neighbors. In another case, it's not. In one case, it's legitimate to take preventive action. In another case, it's not. Where are your principles? When you do this, then the whole architecture of international law comes down crumbling. And then you're back in 1938, and then you're back in 1914. And then what is dangerous is these regional conflicts can spread, these alliances can become more rigid, and great powers will be dragged into these wars. And at some point, these conflicts can become uncontrollable. You can lose control over them because you have your alliance obligations. Then the logic of action, reaction, reprisals may take place, and then the preemptive action. This is the scariest mechanism. Is when you get to the point where the faster you strike, the better off you are. Especially when you deal with nuclear forces. You may have so-called critical instability when both parties think, okay, this is the time to strike. If we don't strike now, tomorrow we won't have our nuclear weapons. We have to use them now. It's very dangerous when the mechanism of preemptive action takes place. Regarding nuclear deterrence, we see a very particular kind of nuclear deterrence right now. It's still working because the West and Russia are not fighting directly. But it's like it's getting closer and closer. The threshold is pushed lower and lower and lower because for the first time now we have military action taking place on the territory of a nuclear state. And NATO is almost directly involved now because NATO has taken over command and control over Ukrainian, from what I understand, air defense forces and aviation and reconnaissance systems. So it's getting closer and closer. They're going to transfer military technology to Ukraine. Ukraine is going to have missiles with 2,500 kilometer range missiles from Germany. So that's going to, it's going to be able to directly strike in the depth of the Russian territory. This is not nuclear deterrence how we knew it in the Cold War. This was unthinkable during the Cold War. So now we have a certain range, a certain interval within which it is possible for nuclear powers to start fighting as long as there's some understanding there's certain lines that cannot be crossed. It was not like this during the Cold War. This was unthinkable. And these red lines may get pushed farther and farther. When the war in Ukraine started, the West was debating whether or not to give javelins to the Ukrainians. Then it came to tanks, then it came to F-16s, to HIMARS, etc. Now we're talking about long-range missiles that are capable of striking at the Russian nuclear deterrent. You know what that means? That means a nuclear attack. So Russia may see this as a nuclear attack, as a threat to its existence. This is the nuclear deterrence has eroded. It's very dangerous.
It's even worse, Arthur, because now we are at the point where we need to contemplate that maybe Israel will just nuke Iran. They might just decide to do that. I mean, this is not unthinkable anymore. I mean, all of the crimes that have been committed so far, it would be one more bridge. But I am more concerned about a nuclear weapons use by Israel than by any of the three superpowers.
Well, I think at this point, Israel is doing pretty well. It has a technological edge, I think, over Iran, and it's been pretty successful at neutralizing Iranian air defense forces and ballistic missiles. So I hope it will not come to that. But
yeah, but the Tel Aviv is burning as well. Haifa is burning. Haifa and Tel Aviv took heavy.
And it's horrible. It's horrible that both sides are suffering from this. Civilians are suffering from this. I think what is much more likely is that the U.S. will enter the fray and it will bomb Iran the way it bombed Yugoslavia and the way it bombed Iraq. I think it may come to that. The U.S. will bomb Iran very, very intensively to bring it to its knees and force it to sign some kind of a capitulation document and try to initiate regime change in Iran, in which case we're going to be headed right to 2003 Iraq. That we may have, like I already said, all these groups may start fighting each other. We don't know how we're going to manage this. This country may start to fall apart, and we may have other countries intervening in it.
Yeah, but the thing is, all of these examples are actually successful examples for the neocons, especially Yugoslavia. I had a talk this morning with David Gibbs. You know, he said it, like, right. Yugoslavia is a poster child of how a war should go for the United States. I mean, massive suffering, but you don't care about that. What you care about is the political outcome and securing your direct interest, which is a NATO base in Kosovo and so on and so forth. Iraq has now for 20 years been under direct U.S. control. The U.S. even controls the oil output from Iraq. So, I mean, the civilian suffering is not the concern. The suffering is direct control of certain areas. Syria, again, oil, and now Sargon, Libya, huge civilian suffering, but goddamn Gaddafi is gone. And Libya as a player in the Pan-African movement is eliminated. I mean, all of these are actually from the neocon perspective, huge success cases. And now they're trying to have another one with Iran. So I think that's the reasoning, no?
That's exactly right, because if you look at it from their point of view, in the short term, yes, it has been a victory, but there's been a tremendous destabilizing effect in the long term. Russia's actions in Ukraine and in Georgia were done with inside of what happened in Kosovo. Russians used the precedent of Kosovo. What happened in Yugoslavia? Well, yes, there was tremendous suffering. A lot of people were massacred. There was ethnic cleansing. In the end, bypassing the United Nations. Again, this is debatable because I think there were reasons for it. And what happened in Srebrenica and Gorazde was horrible and warranted intervention. But again, the way it was done, again, bypassing the United Nations, replacing the UN with NATO, created long-term destabilizing effects because then Russia said, okay, well, we're going to do the same on our end. We're going to create our own defensive alliance. Then we're going to have our own interpretation of international law. So yes, in the short term, they have succeeded. But in the long term, they have done a lot of damage, and we're seeing the consequences of this. And this cannot go on perpetually. If there's one thing we know from international history is that you cannot constantly bully the world and use brute force. Eventually, A, you start exhausting your resources, and B, you create a balancing coalition against you, and the challenger will rise. A, the U.S. is ruined financially. I mean, the economic conditions in the United States, America is a shadow of itself. I mean, I remember America in the 90s. This is a faint shadow of what the U.S. used to be in the 90s, a country of plenty, a country of opportunity, of affluence, of goodwill, of positive attitude, of can-do attitude. This was an amazing country, and it's disappeared in front of my eyes. So internally, there have been devastating consequences. Externally, yes, Russia and China start drifting together and they'll form a balancing coalition against you if they haven't already. And this is also a long-term result of this kind of behavior that the party of war does not see. And these people should be stopped because it's very, very dangerous to have these kind of people in power.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹润。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。